Hey now, happy Thursday. Good morning, PASW staff, clients, and friends joining us. We're going to revisit one of my favorite composers, big person who crossed over. We've talked a lot about musicians who've crossed over from one genre to another genre, and this reminded me a little bit of your assignment because we looked at the holdovers earlier this week, and we talked about the low flute sound in the beginning before going into the piano. So flute reminded me of Paul, who played on this album. But today we're going to look at the composer who used flute, jazz flute, a lot, but he was a jazz pianist. One of my favorites, Claude Bolling. So Claude Bolling did do that. We're going to listen to some examples and we're going to figure out why and how after we run kind of through his life. French jazz pianist. Probably the only other French composer, jazz musician we've looked at is Michel Legrand, who wrote the beautiful score to Umbrellas of Cherbourg that we looked at months and months, maybe a year ago now. He did that jazz opera, right? The Jacques Demy film. And they were born almost at the same time. I don't know if they knew each other ever, but so Claude Bolling's born in 1930 in Cannes, in France, where they had the Cannes Film Festival, that same Cannes, and he died just actually a few months ago, December 29th in 2020, at age 90. So he lived a long, long life. So did Michel Legrand, actually. So let's see. Yeah, we got to get over there because until we get over there, I can't bring up the timeline. I have a ritual here. Let's leave the Austrian Empire, thank God, and let's go over to Cannes in France. So he's born in 1930. So take a look at all the, not all, because we've looked at way more than these, but if he's going along, he's born right when Michel Legrand is born. Okay, so who's he going to be influenced by? So obviously he's going to be influenced by Bach, but that's hundreds and hundreds of years earlier. He's very influenced by Duke Ellington. We did a whole class on Duke. Duke, Count Basie, those guys in the 20s started getting fueling the swing big band era jazz music. He's also very influenced by Fats Waller because Claude Bolling's a pianist. Obviously, Fats Waller's one of the best stride pianists, but doesn't live that long. He's also very influenced by Lionel Hampton, which we'll do a class on at some point. But Lionel Hampton was a jazz vibraphonist and band leader, very influential. We'll talk about him. He's pretty far after Scott Joplin. I always am amazed to see how early Scott Joplin was. Born in 1868. That's like right after the Civil War, and he starts writing early jazz, ragtime music, kind of based all on that the train collision, I think. So this is what Claude Bolling's is seen right now, is being born into this world of the 30s is when swing and big band music and Glenn Miller's taken off. 40s is going to be jazz, so he's going to be very influenced by jazz. And then we're going to take a look at what he did in 1975 that was truly revolutionary. But hold your horses. Let's just start, let's just, everyone calm down. So his father was a hotel manager. And so Claude studies at the Nice Conservatory and then in Paris. He was a child prodigy, though. By 14, he was playing jazz piano professionally. So this is the mid-40s, right? So jazz is really taken off right now. But he stays with pretty traditional jazz because as we know what's going on in the 50s, bebop, Charlie Parker, the late 40s, early 50s, it's getting faster. 50s and 60s, hard bop, avant-garde, late 60s, he's not going to be doing all that. He doesn't play that game. He's going to be playing in pretty traditional jazz. So he's going to stick with the Fats Waller, Duke Ellington influence and use classical elements, we're going to see later, to probably get his own sound. I don't know if he was trying, I think he was, at this point, he's just getting gigs in Europe. And of course, what Europeans loved about our country was that we had jazz. We had jazz clubs. We had all these things. And I think they soon followed. But I kind of think we were, maybe this is the one time when we were maybe the first, but I don't know. So he was a big part of the traditional jazz era. People leading off where Duke Ellington started and staying in that during the 50s and 60s. You know, so not everybody was, and it's not like not forward thinking. It's just like keeping it real. And during this time, he becomes a film composer, mostly films in Europe. But I mean, he wrote over 100 movie scores, and became good friends with Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington took him as part of the family. They met in the 60s, and they collaborated a lot. So we'd yet to come to the crossover moment, because critics and other people say that started in the 70s. Okay, so he was known for a lot of collaborations with different musicians. Probably one, I mean, very famous, Stefan Grappelli and all that stuff later. Probably his most important one is Jean-Pierre Rampal. Rampal was a flutist, a French flutist, and people credit him with returning the flute, the instrument, the flute, to popularity as a solo instrument. We forget about the flute sometimes. We know that Eric Dolphy played flute, but you know, that's kind of avant-garde jazz. That's not mainstream enough. Hubert Laws is going on at the same time in the 70s, 80s, and he's going to be playing flute. So flute was kind of a neglected instrument. Obviously, it's the same fingerings as saxophone, so a lot of saxophonists play the flute as well. But Rampal was really important for getting the flute. He's born in 1922, so he's older than Claude Bolling. But Claude Bolling writes music for him that's going to be very, very famous. It's written in 1973, but it's recorded in 1975. And what we're talking about here is a suite for flute and jazz piano. Here he's going to be mixing Baroque elements, Baroque going all the way back to Bach, with some modern jazz swing elements. Is that even going to work? I mean, that sounds crazy. But this was so popular. It was, I mean, in America, and the whole world took notice when they recorded this little album at first. It was the top of the hit parade for 2 years after its release. So on Billboard Top 40 for 530 weeks. This was huge. For roughly 10 years, this was top Billboard. And if we think of it, it sounds nothing like any other music other than it's just very pleasant and beautiful, lovely music. So it was nominated in 1975 for a Grammy I mean, it was, and I was trying to think last night, I mean, why it was so successful, because 1975, what music is going on? It's not Baroque music at all. It's not, I mean, classical and jazz, sure, people, I mean, there's still composers and stuff, but what do we have in the 70s? No, we have Queen, we have Kiss, we have Chicago, who we did a whole class on. We have Black Sabbath and Aerosmith. I mean, this is heavy guitar playing. This is not Baroque classical music. This isn't really even jazz. I mean, the people I mentioned, that's the dominant. So out of the blue comes this Baroque flute music. You got to be kidding. But I mean, it's good. It worked. I mean, obviously. So we've heard Bach, inventions and fugues and canons and stuff. Listen to this Bolling piece and tell me it doesn't sound almost like Bach, but he's not stealing Bach at all. He's just riffing on top of what Bach kind of laid the foundation for. With Baroque and Blue, there's flute and the right hand piano, and they're having a dialogue and discussion. Left hand is doing chords. He's got a jazz trio. They're all kind of talking to each other. Doesn't it sound like that? So they're using Baroque gestures, and there's no soloing though. Everything's written out, so that's what makes it more like classical music. But he's not being limited to, you can't swing these things, or you can't, he's letting the musicians be free, but they're playing what Claude Bolling had on paper. But there's all this interaction between the musicians. It's just lovely. And as we're hearing this, what are we hearing? We're hearing counterpoint, right? Who knew counterpoint could be so fun and free and jazz-like? So Claude Bolling didn't really like the word combination. He just thought this is a dialogue between two kinds of music. And he said, I've done nothing new. This has been going on for a long time. But I think he did do something new. I think that he was taking his jazz, his love for jazz and his love for classical, and doing something kind of new. But I think with the crossover thing, he was just like, I was just writing fun music. I wasn't trying to be necessarily innovative. I was being serious, but also just, and it's really fun, delightful music. So he said, my main purpose is to make the musicians happy, and if possible, make the audience happy too. And isn't that what we all try to do, especially with art? I mean, even though happy is, lack of a better word, well, feel something, right? We always talk about music. We want to make somebody feel something. So it's cool if you took Bach and jazz and put them together, crossover music, like we said, you would get a little bit of what Bolling was doing, although he was just kind of not trying to not do anything new. He was just trying to talk about dialogue in music and instruments talking to each other, piano and flute talking to each other, but created just lovely sounds through this instrument. So I wanted to go back and look at this. I mean, what he did was kind of revolutionary, and the album was so successful for a Grammy, and nominated for a bunch of stuff. And I just hope you enjoyed it. It's a perfect blend of classical, Baroque, jazz music, which sounds very funny when you think of that, and then when you hear it, it's so pleasant sounding. So I hope you enjoyed looking at Claude Bolling, one of my favorites. And then tomorrow we see your results for the holdovers. Okay, can't wait to show you that. Okay, have a great rest of the day, and see you tomorrow. Bye.